Okay, here we are, part 2 of Driving on Sunlight, where we're answering that viewer's request for seeing how long it takes the vehicle to recover after a longer trip. Somewhere that brought the car down to around 10% charge, and then also, just as you saw previously, we've added in the requirement to recover the system back up to 70%, because that's basically where it sits as well. And so we're repeating the exact same trip. The last trip we did, we knew that we had a couple of cloudy days coming, and as you saw, not only did it take several days to actually recover both the charge to the vehicle and the charge to the system, but it could be argued that we didn't actually recover because we actually had to run the vehicle for a couple of days, about 120 miles or something like that. We can review the data once we get back into the studio, but we actually had to run for a couple of days off of line power instead of sunlight, which was unfortunate, but it happened. So now we're going to repeat the exact same trip, and this time we have several sunny days lined up, and so we'll be able to get a chance to see what's the difference between doing that in a deep shoulder period or maybe just coming out of winter as opposed to doing that in the spring or the summer. So for those just watching this, take note that this isn't usually how an electric vehicle is charged. They don't have to go through this much hassle and this much calculation and preparation. We're doing this because of our desire to chronicle what's going on, and so we're kind of distilling everything down to its numbers to be able to show you what kinds of things you'll need to calculate for. So yesterday I replaced what had been used for the last couple of days of driving. That brought the total charge in the vehicle up to around 172 miles. And the day's driving that we did today brought it down to about 157. Is that what we got? I don't have it up here. 157 or so, 155. And so after the errands that I ran today, I have to make that trip to Sausalito and back, and that's going to be about 250 miles. So what I need to do is I need to put 100 miles onto the car, roughly 32, 34 kilowatt hours. And we have that in the battery storage. We're also currently producing about 7.6 kilowatts. So I think our system is pretty much maxed out. And so the vehicle is going to draw 15 kilowatts, and so you'll be interesting to see. We'll go over again in the studio when this is all done. You'll be able to see the screenshots of that and how that offset with solar what was being put into the car. Now we know everything going into the car is solar because the home's been running for the last several weeks off of nothing but sunlight, and that's all that's in the batteries is sunlight. And the grid is disconnected, has been for a month about now. So let's go ahead and put 32 to 34 kilowatt hours into the car. We're going to bring the car up to 100%, and then we will head to Sausalito. Now, on the way back, we are going to need to bump charge just a little bit. By the time I get to Sausalito, it will be 60, 70 miles or so. So the round trip is going to be right around, if not just a little excess of 250 miles. And so it's not, I'm not comfortable with trying to push the car up the driveway when I get home. So I want to make sure that I get home with somewhere between 7 and 13%, just like we did last time. And so I'll stop in there at Sausalito, put a little bit of a bump charge, probably somewhere between 2 to 5 kilowatt hours, and then that'll be just enough to get us home with a reasonable margin of error. So I suppose we'll pick this back up at the supercharger in Sausalito when I'm on my way home. Okay, well, as the more observant viewers will notice this is not the Sausalito supercharger. So what wound up happening was that once I got there, and after having a very nice evening and driving around just a little bit there in the Sausalito area, in the morning when it came time to head back, the nav computer was telling me that I would make it with 5% charge left on the car. So I thought, okay, well, because I'm passing a couple of superchargers on the way, we can go ahead and see how accurate that is and still not have to risk pushing the car up the driveway. And so that's exactly what I did. Came back, we wound up showing about 14 miles on the car right now. Now that brings up an interesting point about electric vehicle and battery capacity. So I've mentioned in the past that I felt that a ideal range for an electric vehicle was somewhere in the 400 to 600 mile range. And I got a lot of pushback about that. Oh, you know, why so much extra range and all that, you know, it's unnecessary, you don't do that much driving in a day. Well, it's not about how much driving you do in a day. It's about not wanting to push your car up the driveway. That is a major part of it. When we drive a gasoline car, we don't drive it for a day with the idea that we're going to get it home with a teacup full of gas. Well, we do have one benefit with an electric vehicle in that should we get into that situation where we arrive with very few miles left on the car, we have some place to fill it up, to put fuel, as it were, in the car. And that's an option that you obviously don't have with a gasoline vehicle. So you would fuel that vehicle before you got home. So the importance about not pushing your car up the driveway is the situation that we have right now with the battery fully depleted. We don't want to leave it that way for any length of time. We want to start to charge it right away. And ideally, we wouldn't want to get into this situation to begin with. And so in order to do that, on the trip that I just did, 100 miles out, 100 miles back, I don't want to have to be visiting a supercharger if I don't want to. I mean, I got this vehicle early enough that I have the free supercharging, but if I'm going to get charged for it, I'd rather just drive there and drive back on sunlight. So I need the range to be able to do that. Now, if this were a 100 kilowatt hour battery, this is the 90. If this is the 100 kilowatt hour battery, I would have made it back and forth relatively easy. And the argument can certainly be made that no matter how many miles you have on the car, there's always going to be that edge scenario, right, where, you know, oh, you know, I still don't have enough. Well, that argument can hold up only so far, all right, before the argument becomes ridiculous. You've taken care of so many of those edge cases that now you're into that final, you know, 2-3% cases of driving. So that kind of takes care of that on the low end. But why would somebody say that, you know, 500 or 600 miles on the car would be ideal? Well, I don't want to have to fully charge the car either. These batteries operate their best, they have their best longevity when they're kept in that kind of 35 to 65, 70% range. If you can keep swinging it in that range, man, the batteries in the cars will last forever. Now, that's the existing technology. Now, all of this may change and become less important as we start to move to solid state architecture on the batteries where they can handle depletion better, they can handle being stored fully charged better, and then we can have a slightly different conversation about what the range on that vehicle needs to be. Then maybe it really is closer to that 400 mile range or so rather than 6. But that's the argument that I'm sticking to anyway. So that leaves us to our situation here. So what we've got right now going on is that I have 38% charge in the system after it had depleted overnight. And the sun is up, expecting a nice sunny day. I'm probably expecting this to probably be about a 56 plus kilowatt hour day. And so now what we need to do is we need to put some charge back into the car immediately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in and charge at full current. I've got my tablet here monitoring the system so they don't have to worry about dropouts through, through communications and what have you. And so this will allow me to accurately measure how much power I'm depleting from the system on a minute by minute basis. And what that will allow me to do is to not get into a situation where I shut the house off because the grid is shut off. So I don't want to get down to that, once I get down to that last 5% or so, then I have to make a decision. Will I unplug the car and just charge it a little more later? Or what we might do is just turn the current down to the point where it's beneath the contribution of solar. So let's get started and let's take a look at what happens. All right. Check back in an hour or two and see how we're doing. All right, so it's an hour later, and in keeping with our theme for this time of year, what we've done is we've transferred power, 15 kilowatt hours of sunlight from the system into the vehicle. And that brought our total charge in the vehicle up to a 24%, 25%. So now that brings us back to our original theme at the beginning of the year, which was decision point. So that hasn't gone away. We're still looking into that. So every time that we get into a situation like this that requires a decision to be made, then those are the kinds of things that we're going to keep track of. And at the end of the year, when we do our final assessment, we'll have an opportunity then to make some very powerful suggestions to not only Tesla, but anybody who will manufacture these types of systems, showing that it's very important for the vehicle to be able to communicate with the system as a whole, so that settings can be done that basically go in line with your day and how you've spent your energy and how you need to then recoup that energy into the vehicle so that it's most convenient for you. So what we've got going right now is that the system is now down to 20%. And so as you recall, we're going to need about somewhere between 15 and 20% left in the system to be able to get us through the evening, right? But there are other factors as well. I need to get about my day. So what am I going to do to facilitate that? I could, if I were going to be remaining home, I could set the system now so that the car would charge at a lower rate than solar contribution. And that would maintain our 20% in the system for evening use. And then I could just simply charge the car until it was full. But I need to be about my day. And so what I'm going to do instead is rely on the fact that I know that the remainder of the day is going to be sunny. And I'll pull up a screenshot here of the weather report. And that shows also that the next several days are also going to be sunny. So we can depend on that for how much driving that we're going to be able to do on sunlight. Calculate that out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to deplete the system to probably around 5%, 2%, whatever I feel comfortable with. Remember, the system is shut off. It's not attached to the grid. And so I don't want to get into a situation where I inadvertently go too low because of the times of reporting, that kind of a thing. It's generally, there's about 5 minutes or so of updates. Every 5 minutes it'll update the percentage. And so obviously I don't want to completely deplete the system, so 5% will be fine. That'll be enough driving for me for the day, and then I'll come back and perhaps do a second charge in the evening. So that's where we're at. So I'm going to go ahead and deplete the system and get over to the studio, and then we can close out there with some finishing thoughts on the last couple days of driving on sunlight and how that compared to the previous episode where we basically ran out of sunlight. So we'll see you in the studio. right, well, let's get started on our closeout for our third week in April. So that second exercise where we looked at Terry's suggested experiment went a little better than our first one did. Our first attempt wound up ending with a couple of cloudy days that wound up really kind of conspiring against us. So the result of that was that we wound up having to source 154.4 miles from an alternative source. So that out-of-town driving was done on the 17th and 18th, but let's drop back real quick to the 15th, which is where we left off last week. And so here you can see a reduced solar contribution a bit for the day, but a bit of rainy weather, plenty of miles on the vehicle, and no trip planned, so we didn't put any charge on the car. Not much else to see there. And then the notes. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Nothing to the vehicle, just the vehicle stats. And then on the 16th here, 25.9 miles of driving, 25% first solar contribution percentage. Wound up ending the day at 61% at the total solar day, and then we obviously put some charge into the vehicle. And sunlight obviously returning to pretty decent contribution there. Healthy charge to the car. Here's the notes. 18 kilowatt hours to the car. And again, this gets us set up for that out-of-town travel that we had planned for the 17th. And so with a bump of 18 kilowatt hours to the car, that brought us to a good starting point of about 180 miles. So that way it wouldn't take us very long to top off on the 17th. And then that's exactly what we've got here. Here's the 17th. Decent production day. %, before the vehicle charge, and the 42% after. That represents that the sun was able to recoup us to that point. It's a little confusing there because this day was a little bit out of the normal. And so then again, great contribution. And so the thing to look at here, I suppose, is also that because I needed to head out of the San Francisco Bay Area Route 2, I needed to then charge the vehicle to 100% before leaving. And so let's look at the notes and also a screenshot. So here's those and the screenshot. And so what this shows here is that offset between the amount of power that we were getting from the Powerwall and the amount that we were getting from solar. So then you can see that there. In total, we're looking at a total draw in the home of about 17 kilowatts, and of that, about half was supplied by solar, and about half was supplied by that green line that you see. That's the contribution from the Powerwall. And so then we drove to the destination, and then a couple things worked in our favor. The biggest one that worked in our favor was that my better half and I decided not to go anywhere, but instead just kind of enjoy each other's company for a change. And that meant that we didn't do any additional driving. So the car ended the day at 50%. And so as I'm looking at it, charge showed that I had 123 miles left, and the return trip was going to be between 90 and 110 miles or something of that nature. So at this point I'm thinking I just might actually make it home without charging. So I figured I'd take a look at it in the morning and see where we sat. But I mentioned, my brilliant idea was to relax with my lady and get reacquainted. But you know how these things go. So as luck would have it, I'm there sampling an absinthe at a local bar and grill, and a nice couple next to us takes an interest in the absinthe. And it turns out that I'm having this wonderful conversation with Eli Burton of My Tesla Adventure and his lady as well. And so the ladies were great sports about it as Eli and I commenced to get our techno geek on as we shared our common interests for the next hour. So great meeting you, Eli. Looking forward to seeing you again. Eli and I will probably be getting together with Alex Guberman pretty soon. Alex is with E4 Electric. He does a really nice podcast about electric vehicle transport is his main focus, but he's also recently been kind of looking into alternative energy sources. Again, when you drive an EV, you keep hearing that terrible argument of, oh, well, your car is just as dirty as any other vehicle is. And it's so annoying because we all know that that's dependent on what type of an energy source you're using. And so both Eli and Alex were really interested in the fact that we're running off of sunlight. And no matter how clean you try and make a clean diesel, the last time I checked, you still can't run one off of sunlight. And so I'll leave some links in the description to both of their channels, My Tesla Adventure and E4 Electric. Both of those are really nice podcasts. I've quite enjoyed watching them. So here we are, moving on to the 18th. Got good day of driving, 118.3. First contribution of 27%. And then we wound up with a total daily production 54.7 kilowatt hours. And then again, actually did wind up having enough to get us back home, as you saw in the video. And then after returning home, we gave the vehicle an immediate injection of 26 kilowatt hours to make sure that we didn't damage the battery by leaving it in that very depleted state. So you see here by the notes, 26 kilowatt hours to the vehicle, about to charge up to 40% charge. That's a safe resting point as we're have enough miles on the car also to ensure that if we need the car, then we can use it. The since last charge data shows us that total distance of the trip at 214.5 miles, and that against our actual charge estimate of 250 miles. And that's pretty typical. That's a pretty typical loss for me. I tend to drive like a moron when it comes to energy conservation. So, don't take that as being Tesla's fault. The car's problem was the loose nut behind the steering wheel. So, here we have the 19th. Good contribution for a cloudy day, partially cloudy day. 50 kilowatt hours or so. 30 kilowatts, again, pumped straight to the car. We're trying to get it to that 90%, Terry. And then here's the notes. 35 kilowatt hours to the vehicle. As you can see, the driving miles makes it difficult sometimes to hit that 90%. You're always, running against that deficit of whatever it is you happen to be using that day. And so any makeup is going to be done in just your freeboard. What do you have that's over and above your total usage? But did pretty good. Ended the day with about 64% charge in the car. And then on the 20th, we have this, another 19.8 miles of driving. Good production of the day, slightly over 50 kilowatt hours. 28 kilowatt hours of the vehicle, the rest of the home. And then the 19th and 20th, that basically does represent the recovery for the vehicle, I think. And here's the notes. And so basically by the end of the day here, we're recovered from that trip. And 28 kilowatt hours to the vehicle, like you see there, the vehicle information, ending at 89. So the vehicle is back to 90%. And then the following day, 21st here, very good production day, 60 kilowatt hours. And then this brings the system to its point where it's also topped off, and the vehicle also is remaining at 90%. And so then here's that final notes for the day. 9 kilowatt hours, odometer reading, beginning of the day, end of the day. Again, plugging in now at the end of the day. This is seeing us have a return to more of a usual way that I would charge the vehicle, and I'm sure the way most of you charge your vehicles as well. You drive it and you come home at the end of the day and you plug it in. You start off the next day fresh, obviously, with your vehicle charged, and that's handy. So then we've got here the 22nd. Quite a bit of driving today. Also, again, like I was saying, a return to a more natural charge cycle. And let you read that for a second here. And then we'll bring up the notes. And so again, to the vehicle, 30 kilowatt hours. And the important thing to remember there again is that charge was put on in the evening. And so then, the notes basically just what I mentioned before about the charging in this way, and that also might cause us some difficulty in figuring out what our vampire losses are for the car. But don't worry about that, because what I'm going to do is later in the summer I'm actually going to have a special quick topic where we will examine the losses that we get, not only the vampire losses from the car, but also the transfer losses. We actually have to go through several inverters to get the power from the roof into the batteries, from the batteries back into the car. And so we're going to go ahead and go over those losses in detail because the topic deserves it. So that's about it for the close of the third week in April. And I hope you enjoyed this week episode, even though it was a little longer than most, but it was a fun one anyway. And as always, if this is the first video that you happen to stumble on, if this is something that interests you, feel free to watch some of the other videos and get caught up. It helps us quite a bit when folks are able to respond in the comment section. This series is a little different than most vlogs in that we base quite a bit of our content on the feedback of the people that are watching, as far as what experiments you might like to see us run over the course of a day, or if there's something specific that you might like to see us focus in on. I think that we're better poised to be able to answer some of those, at least at this point in the project, when we don't have everybody screaming at us yet. So, but that's about it. Thank you for joining me for this third week closeout in April, and we'll see you again really soon with the full closeout for April and the fourth week.